Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We are so happy to have you with us as a part of our program here today. A lot to get into, from Kirby Smart and a handful of Georgia players' appearance at SEC Media Days yesterday. We'll hear from players, coaches. We'll hear, at least Coach Kirby Smart. We'll hear from some of them on that today. We'll continue to hear from them over the course of the next couple of days there as well. We'll talk to Mike Griffith on today's program, who was in Nashville yesterday with the Georgia contingent. We got some recruiting news to get to, some slightly bad news, possibly some slightly good news, and kind of everything else in between there on that. We'll cover a lot of ground, in other words, and we are really happy to have you with us for it. So without any kind of further ado, what do you say we just dive right into it? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So Georgia had its appearance at SEC Media Days yesterday, and before we do our regular show here, if you're watching on video, if you listen on podcast, we have a little thing we do for about 15 minutes on our own website, DawgNation.com. By the way, how great does the brand new look for DawgNation.com look right now? But we do a little thing there called our First and 15, just some comments and some sort of a slow build or ramp up to the actual show that starts at 10 a.m. And we were talking about Kirby's appearance, and one of the things that came up a moment ago is that the one thing you know about Kirby Smart going into a venue like this is that he's not going to really hit too hard on the topics that people, fans, are the most interested in. Like, he's not going to reveal some grand secret about the quarterback situation or how other position battles are playing out, or the idea of, here's the game that Kirby Smart's the most worried about. That's the kind of thing that, you might, it'd certainly be interesting if Kirby Smart would talk about those sorts of things, but Kirby Smart's not going to. And I think the assumption that could be very easy to make is, well, since Kirby Smart's going to avoid all of the topics that are probably the most interesting to fans and do everything he can to sort of stay away from a lot of that kind of stuff, because that stuff is decided on the field, it's decided in practice and things like that. Because Kirby Smart's going to avoid topics like that, therefore the stuff that he says is going to probably be pretty bland, pretty boring. And the actual truth is, I think that even though Kirby Smart avoids interesting topics, hot topics, the kind of sort of buzzy conversations that fans bide their time with during the summer and the offseason, even though Kirby Smart attempts to sidestep all of that, the stuff that he actually says in a venue like this, I think, is pretty interesting. Now, maybe we only think that because we're Georgia fans and we're just sort of, we'll take whatever we can get when it comes to Georgia football conversation. Maybe that's what it is. But nonetheless, I think that Kirby Smart does a pretty good job of how he talks about the things that he chooses to talk about, including the big idea that he brought up yesterday, the fact that Georgia, two-time national champion, go for 2 in 22. You heard us talk about that last year. Go for 3 in 23. We're all about that here for this upcoming year. But as that stands as a possible objective that might prevent, a threat that might prevent any of this from happening. Now, doesn't that sound like a little bit of an interesting topic? Doesn't that sound like something to kind of sink your teeth into a little bit? Kirby Smart sees a threat to UGA's success, an impediment to Georgia's dynasty. And yesterday, Kirby Smart, as he took the podium at SEC Media Days, by the way, wearing a very, very sharp suit. Not every SEC coach, I think, is a well-dressed man. Kirby Smart looks pretty sharp here right there in the suit that you might see on the screen in front of you, had me watching on a video. But Kirby Smart talked directly yesterday about the threat that he sees for Georgia here this season. This is good stuff. Take a listen to Kirby Smart.
I do want to speak briefly on dealing with the threat of complacency. Everybody here has talked about, is the emphasis on three-peat? Is the emphasis on what are you going to do next? How are you going to top that? How do you top an undefeated season? The threat for us is complacency. The first thing you have to do is acknowledge that it's a threat. It's the first step towards stomping it out. So we look for two things when we look for people to join our organization. I'm not talking about players. I'm talking about anybody in our organization. Do they love football, and do they embrace being part of something bigger than themselves? Are they selfless? And those two qualities are not dependent on outcomes. Did I win or loss? Did I get a sack? Did I touch the ball? That's not what we're looking for, guys that are dependent on outcomes. We want guys that think independent of outcomes.
There is something interesting about the comment that Kirby Smart makes there that I want to kind of dive into a little bit. I find it really interesting that Kirby Smart addresses the threat facing Georgia, complacency, the idea that people within the organization just get a little too used to winning and assume that somehow winning some sort of inheritance, birthright, this thing that's destined to take place no matter what they do. And Kirby Smart says the way in which you battle against that threat is through the personnel that you have in your organization, the players in the field, the coaches that coach them, the support staff that helps the coaches coach the players, all of that. That Kirby Smart sort of points directly to personnel as a defense against the perhaps natural complacency that could sort of seep in. And I think the reason why that's such an interesting and probably astute observation from Smart is that the idea of good people just being a little bit of a scarce commodity, the sort of players who don't put their individual success above team success, the kinds of coaches who are willing to sort of work as hard as required, both on the recruiting trail and on the practice field, to make sure that the players are trained up and developed as well as they possibly could be, the kind of energy it requires to be that kind of person, that's just a little bit of a scarce commodity. There will never be enough people in any organization to kind of push you towards that greatness, or enough people to sort of fill every organization. So if you're Georgia, you want your unfair share of those kinds of people, those kinds of players, those kinds of support staff types, those kinds of coaches. Because when you have players exit your program, every year Georgia does through the NFL draft, when the transfer portal is now a little bit of a factor when it comes to this kind of stuff with Georgia, when other programs are coming to call, typically they are. Georgia lost its offensive coordinator here this year, lost its defensive coordinator after the 2021 season. Now, Kirby Smart did talk yesterday about the fact that everybody that Georgia employs as a coach right now was on the staff a year ago, but you still have some attrition from your coaching staff, even if you're kind of hiring from within there, that the natural kind of brain drain or talent drain from your coaching staff and your support staff ranks and your player ranks, there's just always going to be a scarcity of the kinds of people that contribute to that kind of culture, the kind of culture that fights back against complacency. And so it's interesting to hear Kirby Smart state that as explicitly as he did. And then he went on into more detail about exactly what Georgia does to sort of fight against what Kirby, I think, sees as a natural enemy of complacency, the idea that you just get a little too used to winning and that winning might make you just a little bit soft. Here's more from Kirby Smart about that.
Better never rests. We believe that. Those are strong words now when you think about it. Think deep on it. Better never rests. Our kids understand it. Our kids have learned it. What drives us for this season is intrinsic motivation. We're not going to be controlled by outside narratives and what people say and who's going to be the quarterback. The intrinsic motivation comes from within and what we decide to do. This team, the 2023 team, is still defining itself. We don't know where that goes. That happens over the course of the rest of the summer and fall camp, but I like where it's at. I love the buy-in. I love the fact these guys love being around each other and they love competing and they love football. So that's important to me.
The concept of better never rest, which is pretty clearly going to be a phrase that we hear a lot from Kirby Smart here this year. As many of you are aware of, that comes from a New Zealand rugby team called the All Blacks. They're called the All Blacks because that's the color of their uniform. And you might be surprised to find out I am not a rugby expert, but even I've heard of the All Blacks before. I guess there's a famous book that's been written about them, and that's obviously been a big source of motivation for Georgia throughout this offseason, studying that book and the concepts that I guess have been put forth by the New Zealand rugby team known as the All Blacks. In fact, the All Blacks on Twitter yesterday gave a nice shout-out to Georgia football. That was kind of a cool symmetry to see there on all of this. But Kirby Smart talking about the battle against complacency being won by being committed to never rest, to always be in search of being better and never sort of sit back and rest on laurels as a way of getting that done. Now, let me pause here for a moment. I realize that for a certain portion of the audience, this is a little bit touchy-feely. Not what I'm saying necessarily. Even some of the stuff that Kirby Smart's saying just sort of feels a little too psychological, I guess, is what I'm trying to say here. And there are a lot of people who sort of prefer the conversation to be a little bit more overtly about football. I totally get that. So let me see if I can kind of pivot that direction. All of the stuff that Kirby Smart is saying there, I actually think shows up in a very tangible way in the season here this year. That if you want to measure how better never rests Georgia really is, or how against complacency Georgia really is, how much of a threat that Georgia truly views that to be, and how much the idea of complacency really does threaten Georgia, I think there is one way we can see that show up on the field for this team here this year. And a way of sort of setting that up, I want to let you hear from Cedric Von Braun-Granger. Now, Van Braun, one of the very few players to ever go to back-to-back media days. I'm not quite so sure how often that's even happened, but that's the kind of lead for Georgia or anybody else. That's just the kind of leader that he is. And taking the vision cast by Kirby Smart of fighting against complacency, realizing that better never rests, all that kind of stuff. I thought that Van Braun yesterday, who's obviously a great spokesman for Georgia, I thought he did a really good job of sort of describing in practical terms about what all of this means. And here is where you kind of get a little bit more specific into on the football field, the games that Georgia's about to play, and the way that fans themselves can evaluate how all of this is playing out during the season. Let me let you hear SVP, and then I'll explain why what he said is important. Here is from yesterday, Cedric Von Braun-Granger.
Nobody from the previous two teams is going to go out there and play for you. Jordan Davis isn't putting on a jersey this year for Georgia. Like, he's not playing. So it's just understanding that, yes, what those guys have accomplished is great, but this team has not accomplished anything. We have not played a game yet. We have not played anybody. We haven't done anything. So I think it's really just understanding that if you want what they had, you have to work for it. And I think that's just the biggest thing, understanding that all of your opponents are great. All of those guys are going to come with it. They're going to be prepared. Nobody's going to be unprepared. Everybody's going to be giving you their best shot. So it's up to you to make sure that you're working just as hard, if not more, than the guys that came before you to try and hopefully, by the grace of God, achieve something that you want.
So I just think that's really interesting that at the end there, Van Braun says, hey, listen, here's how all this shows up in how we prepare and how we perform and play here this season. The understanding that all of our opponents are great and that really anybody can beat us at any moment. And here is where you have to get kind of honest here just for a second. Georgia won a national championship in 2022 about as easily as any team probably could, right? They had two close games, the Peach Bowl and the game against Missouri. Other than that, Georgia just totally ran through the entirety of the season. I literally don't know that I've seen a team win a national championship in an easier fashion than Georgia won the 2022 national championship. They were that dominant. And it would require a lot of nitpicking to even find any negative about the Georgia season a year ago. But if you did really want to kind of like dig in and say, hey, what was the thing that you didn't like? I think some Georgia fans would say the best version of Georgia we saw like a handful of times. That there were plenty of games where Georgia knew maybe it didn't need its best, and therefore it didn't give its best. It didn't really require that day. They were doing seemingly just enough to win, and they moved on. They got ready for the next game, and ultimately it didn't cost Georgia. But there is that sense of, well, it could have, that if you try to flip the switch to really play at your best in the games that matter, that can get a little dangerous after a little while. It didn't hurt Georgia in 2022, but it kind of could have. That if you really wanted to kind of nitpick what was a perfect season and a second straight national championship, admittedly not an easy thing to do, but if you wanted to nitpick the Georgia season a year ago, that's what you might say is, Georgia wasn't always at its best every single game, and while it never hurt Georgia, it certainly could have hurt Georgia to not play at that consistent high elite level in 2022, which is all the more reason why I think that you want to kind of have that as a goal and a mission here for this year in 2023, especially given the fact that on paper, a lot, if not all, of the 2023 games that Georgia is slated to play in the regular season, there really isn't a marquee matchup in the bunch. Maybe Tennessee will be, but Tennessee's got some work to do to make it matter. Maybe Ole Miss could be. The same thing is true there for the Rebels. Auburn early in the season, that's a possibility, but that's an Auburn team not even likely to be ranked in the top 25. But you have to kind of stretch to sort of find the marquee matchup that truly matters for Georgia. All the more reason to go back to use the phrase that Smart used a moment ago. You got to try to find that intrinsic motivation. You got to motivate yourself because the opponent that you're playing may not provide its own natural motivation. And if you're not careful, it becomes the kind of thing that can sneak up on you. Because, as I pointed out before, college football did not miraculously become easy to predict overnight. This is a sport that has surprised you and me both for the entirety of our lifetime. That's why we love it. There are mysteries to unfold in every season. Things happen that we cannot have predicted and that we could have never expected them. Because if we could predict them, if we did expect them, they wouldn't be unpredictable. But unpredictable moments are true in each and every season. The last time the SEC had a back-to-back national champion going into a new season was Alabama in 2013. In that year, Auburn came out of nowhere. It was a first-year coach in Gus Malzahn, glorified high school coach. It was a converted defensive back playing quarterback in Nick Marshall, yet they won the SEC. They played for the national championship, and they almost won that. It's the kind of unpredictable thing that college football has a way of providing us. And so if you're thinking about Georgia this year, what's the thing that stands in the way of winning a third straight national championship? I'm going to tell you, it's more likely to be something you can't foresee than it is to be something that you do foresee, because that's just the way that college football works. Unpredictable, weird things stand at the forefront of Georgia over the course of the next 12 games, 15 games, the next handful of months. And if you want to make sure you don't fall prey to the big surprise that waits for Georgia, then be a better never rest type team. Be a team that takes every moment seriously. As Cedric Von Prine says, be a team that takes every game seriously, because a Missouri, like almost happened a year ago, can pop up out of nowhere. So that's how you take an idea that Kirby Smart displayed yesterday, the idea of fighting against complacency, and you talk about specifically how it might, man, no one's won 3 straight national championships in any sense of the modern era of college football. But just because no one has done it doesn't mean that it can't happen. It may be a better way of saying no one's done it yet. Maybe Georgia will be that team here this year. And fighting against complacency, as Kirby Smart says, is going to be a big way towards getting that goal accomplished. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by our friends at Breda Pest Management, and we are happy to have you with us, no matter how. You get to us today live on video. We start at 9:45, as I said a moment ago, on our First and 15, DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, across all of those video platforms. Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, Apple, Spotify, posting the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com. So many ways for you to connect with us here, and we're just glad you picked one of those and choose to do it. We're really, really thankful for all of that. And a big thanks to our friends at Breda Pest Management who make it all possible. We're so happy to have them as a part of our show here because we love the great work they do for UGA. This is, after all, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. That means when you're at Sanford Stadium or one of the other athletic venues, you know that spot, that venue is protected from bugs and critters and termites by our friends at Breda Pest Management. The same level of service that Breda provides to UGA, they can provide for you there as well. A company that's been in business since 1975 with 125 employees working hard to satisfy the needs of all those they take care of. They want to put that same level of service for you. And those resources can be leveraged for your benefit because when you make the switch, kind of kick the fly-by-night company you might be working with to the curb, you're going to put more money back in your pocket instantly just for making that switch to Breda Pest Management. After all, maybe with the company you're currently working with, you get the letter in the mail, cost of service going up. At the same time, the quality of the service seems to be going down. That is not the way that it's going to be with our friends at Breda Pest Management. They take care of UGA athletics venues. They can take care of your home or commercial property or whatever you have, rental property. They can take care of all of that there as well, too. So please, reach out. Find them online, BredaPest.com. That is BREDA, BredaPest.com. You can find them today. All right, coming up in a couple of moments, we're going to catch up with Mike Griffith there in Nashville at SEC Media Days. We'll find out from him what it was like being in the room yesterday with Kirby Smart, those Georgia players. We'll cover all of that ground here coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, let's go around the DawgHouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream. And I want to shift gears here for a moment and talk a little bit about a couple of UGA recruiting notes. One of these, I guess, on the bad side, one of these possibly on the good side there as well. Georgia did have the decommitment yesterday. I'll show you this on the screen here from Jalen Hayward, who announced that he's no longer a part, or I guess On3 announced for him that he's no longer a part of that 2024 recruiting class for Georgia. The safety backing off that pledge there to UGA. A lot of Georgia fans left to wonder, okay, well, what does this mean moving forward? Is this an example that Hayward now knows that, for instance, five-star future safety at Georgia, KJ Bolden, is going to be a part of this 2024 class? Well, I think that folks think that Bolden could be a part of this class no matter what, and Hayward's decision, I think, will largely be viewed as sort of independent of that. This isn't a move being made so that there's room for KJ Bolden. Georgia was always recruiting KJ Bolden, even while Hayward's a part of this class. If anything, I think what this does is put a larger spotlight on the decision that Bolden's going to make on August the 5th. This is a player that Georgia desperately wants. I think this is one of the big targets remaining for Georgia here in this class. The recruiting battle for Bolden may not end on August the 5th, but when you have a guy like Hayward stepping away, obviously that puts a larger spotlight on the decision that Bolden is going to make here. And, Georgia's still trying to put together a historic type class. this decommitment alone is not going to necessarily change that. And obviously, I think that Georgia has earned the right here to kind of work through its recruiting process. You're going to chase some big fish. You're going to lose one out of the boat every now and then. This is not the last decommitment Georgia's probably likely to suffer. Then there's some expectation there could be some more news on that front maybe within the next few days there as well. And that's just sort of the cost of doing business. You're going to lose some good players as you also work to add the very best players you can possibly add. Hayward, the latest example of that, but attention will be paid in the next few days to who Georgia also has a chance to add defensively. And as many of you are aware, that list could be a long one indeed. So that's the news there on that front. Now, on a better note, and on the other side of the ball here for a moment, there's a growing sense that Georgia could be in a good position for running back Nate Frazier, who's a guy we've talked about before, and a guy that we think could provide a really interesting spark to the Georgia offense overall. And one of the things I think has been interesting for Georgia offensively with the class of 2024 is just how dynamic some of the offensive weapons could be, the Nikars and the White Phillips and the guys, the Scovey Whites, guys you may want to talk about there. And another guy who would certainly fit that profile if he were to join this Georgia class is the four-star running back Nate Frazier. There's been some online chatter as of late connecting Frazier to UGA. You can't help but notice that. Frazier himself sort of hinting at being pretty close to a decision here. Now, the other day, Frazier dropped to top 8, so from that standpoint, it sort of seemed like maybe he was a little farther away than I initially thought that he would be. But the recent statements would seem to make you think he's getting a little closer. In fact, let me show you this from Frazier on Twitter here. The hardest part about recruiting, he says, is building great relationships with the coaches and losing them because you decide to go to another school. So it doesn't take a genius to read between the lines there on that Frazier may be letting some coaches down easy a bit, telling them he plans on not coming to their school. Does that mean he's made his choice? And does that mean some of the online predictions connecting him to Georgia are true? We will have to wait and find out. But that would certainly, I think, be a decision worth celebrating. Frazier's a player that I believe Georgia fans have acquainted themselves with, have really grown to like, and if he is on his way to UGA, that would be truly very good news. So potential good news there on what could be a looming commit, but obviously the bad news, you wish Hayward well as he moves on to the next phase of his recruitment, and obviously all eyes pointing towards KJ Bolden, who would certainly be a terrific safety for Georgia if he were to make that pledge to the Dogs here on August 5th. And I don't know what you do about all the chatter that's out there on the Bolden thing right now. Is it still Georgia-Ohio State? Has Florida State really wrestled their way in here as much as their sort of local Tallahassee-based media wants to seem to suggest that it is? Is Auburn a factor there? Your guess is as good as mine there on that. But the sense that you get is that Georgia still feels really good about that. So this is when we love recruiting. It's good soap opera-style drama, and the Bolden recruitment seems to have plenty of that. We'll make it around the DawgHouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper, Strawberries and Cream. And I think this is an exciting new option here when it comes to what's going down with our friends there at Dr. Pepper, the great new, the great new offering, Dr. Pepper, Strawberries and Cream. What a fun thing all of that is. There we go. The great new offering there from them. You know how much I love the regular Dr. Pepper, but now you got the brand new Strawberries and Cream flavor. Zero sugar, of course. You got that option there too. But anytime Dr. Pepper introduces a brand new permanent flavor offering, that is what you're going to get. And it goes down with our friends at Dr. Pepper, Strawberries and Cream. A lot of you have tried it. You said it's great. Obviously, it's a great time of year to be trying it. And anything from Dr. Pepper, I'm all about that. So check out Dr. Pepper, Strawberries and Cream, and Dr. Pepper, Strawberries and Cream, zero sugar. You can find some at Kroger. You can find some wherever you're doing your grocery shopping. Really good new offering from our friends at Dr. Pepper, and great to have them as a part of Around the DawgHouse here today. All right, so we got a lot coming up here. When we get to our SEC through a little bit later on, we'll kind of cover some of the ground as it relates to some of the other events taking place at SEC Media Days. I think there are a couple of coaches that I think have probably performed here pretty well. I think today will be interesting, they're in Nashville, so we'll cover some of that ground too. I'm also, before we're done, going to let you hear from Kirby Smart on another topic. Smart, once again, directly addressing some of the offseason concerns that have popped up around UGA. I thought Smart had some pretty strong words in relationship to some of that yesterday, so we will cover that before we're done today there as well. And frankly, next couple of days at least, kind of dealing with what Georgia players and Smart himself said there at SEC Media Day. So we'll cover all of that here over the course of the next couple of minutes. But for now, on everything else happening in Nashville, what is going on with Georgia, what players had to say, what Smart had to say, the vision cast for the 2023 season yesterday. Let's talk to a guy who's never complacent, seemingly anyway. Mike Griffith here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll pull him out of the Nick Saban press conference here for a moment, what I think is the Saban press conference taking place, and talk to him about the Georgia Bulldogs here a little bit. Mike Griffith joining us live from Nashville. Mike, thanks for your time. Appreciate you being here. We'll try to keep it brief because I know you got a lot of stuff you want to do, but I am curious to get your thoughts on Georgia from yesterday. I think it's possible to have a bad showing at media days. Maybe we've seen that from time to time. I don't believe that Georgia did. I thought that Kirby Smart was pretty good there in the overall big room. And it's pretty obvious the players are buying into what he's selling because in many cases they echoed a lot of that same sentiment when they had their own moments to speak there. I thought that Georgia kind of looked like a two-time national champion moving about in Nashville yesterday, but I wasn't there. You were. What was your experience like?
Yeah, Brandon, I thought it was a great vibe. In fact, I think it was the best vibe I've been saying since the second quarter of the TCU championship game, because I don't know who was still watching that game really in the second half. But in terms of the enthusiasm and, the positivity, I thought Kirby hit the right notes. I thought the players represented, just a really strong day for Georgia football, and not just how they presented, but how they were received. And, it felt like a two-time championship program, and it's pretty well documented. It's been a challenging off-season. It's at times put a damper. But I didn't feel that or sense that yesterday, and I think it started with Kirby. I think Kirby was in a really good way, and I just thought he had a really strong performance.
One of the things I brought up before you joined us is that college football has a way of surprising us. Like, there's no obvious reason that Georgia shouldn't be right in the thick of the championship chase all year long and maybe even winning it. They'll certainly be favored to do that. But, we have seen weird things happen in the SEC before. And so, Mike, the point that I brought up before you joined us is that, the notion of not being complacent, of better never rest, and all those catchphrases, as Cedric Von Prawn pointed out, the way you kind of tangibly relate that to your actual task as a player is to understand that every game is an opportunity for disappointment and an opportunity to be upset if you're not careful about it. Obviously, the Missouri game could have been that a year ago. And so to me, when I think about, what could prevent another championship season for Georgia, it's not a known commodity that you circle. Tennessee game, who knows how good Tennessee is when that game's played? Who knows who you would even play in the college football playoff if you're able to get there? It's more about the unknown weird things that just sort of pop up during a year, and that's why I think some of the messaging that Smart and the players delivered yesterday, that's why I think it could matter, because college football has a way of sort of throwing some things at you that you could have never expected.
Well, Georgia's won, 27 straight regular season games, I believe. And, even the best players and some of the best programs in the country can have great seasons. Trevor Lawrence, I don't believe he ever lost a regular season game, and yet he never won a Heisman Trophy. He only won one championship, right? So it takes a degree of luck. It takes the right matchups. I think what you're saying is right. Georgia goes into the year, I think, with the best odds, as much because of what they bring and their schedule as anything else. But at the same time, there are unknowns. When people look at the schedule and say, boy, that looks easy, I say, well, Missouri looked pretty easy on the preseason schedule last year, right? And yet that was a game that Georgia, easily could have lost. I don't think there was anything easy about the Ohio State game, but once again, if somebody makes a field goal, they lose that football game. Or if Brock Bowers doesn't pull the matrix move, or, perhaps if the Ohio State receiver. There's all these what-ifs, these breaks, these moments in games. And Georgia's been on the right side of those finally, at long last. My goodness, the 2017 Georgia team was, I believe, a more dominant team at times than last year's was, right? And could have easily won the national title if not for second at 26. So, you see these breaks and they go both ways. 2018 Georgia, wasn't that far off really if they get a couple plays. If they're a little bit deeper and more well-rounded, like the last 2 years. So I think Kirby Smart knows that. I think his players know that. And, I think there's a great awareness that it doesn't change the fact, though, that there's another team on the other side of the ball, and they're going to have something to say about how the games go and everybody's going to know what to expect when they play the Georgia Bulldogs.
Let me go into a couple specific issues here for a moment. We found out yesterday morning that Dion Bowie is no longer a part of this program. There have been rumors to that effect here for a little while. To me, this doesn't have a huge impact on what happens for Georgia on the field, and I think that anytime you go to the transfer portal, there's a little bit of a risk it might not quite work out. This one didn't work out very, very quickly, obviously. But ultimately, I don't know this reverberates very much, but it was certainly interesting news yesterday because a lot of Georgia fans have gotten to know Bowie pretty well through the recruiting process. What did you make of Smoke's short stint at UGA?
Yeah, well, he made it through spring drills, and this is a guy Georgia recruited and had taken a commitment from, and was from Kirby Smart's hometown. He'd been camping at Georgia since ninth grade, top 100 recruit. This is a guy that, all signs were this was a good prospect and a good chance. And it's going to cost Georgia a scholarship, Brandon. They got to keep this scholarship doesn't come back. It does hurt. I guess an NIL softens the blow a little bit. But as you said, there's a reason why Georgia got him, and it's because they felt that they had a need at that position. So that's one more guy down that they no longer have. I think he probably would have been maybe the fourth corner. But still, it's a long season. It's too early to say. If two starting cornerbacks go down, we're going to go, boy, it's too bad that Smoke Bowie didn't work out. But, right now on the surface with all the talent Georgia has, you say, yeah, okay. It's unfortunate, but it happens. So Georgia's down to 3 transfers on their roster, 2 from the offseason. It was encouraging yesterday to hear Kirby Smart mention Ra Thomas again because, I felt like, and Kirby didn't say this, but maybe I surmised this, the fact that he didn't catch a ball in the spring game. I didn't feel like spring ended on a really high note for Ra Thomas. And that was a guy they need to work out. If you look at the Georgia offense, I think that X position where they lost to Donnie Mitchell, that's a spot where you say, you know what, they're not going to be as good there this year. Maybe you don't, but that's kind of my sense. Marcus Rosemy-Jackson is reliable, but I don't think he has the same speed or playmaking ability that Adonai Healy. He hasn't exhibited that yet. He's reliable. He's got good hands. He's a good blocker, but I don't think he's Adonai Mitchell. So that's a spot where Georgia needed to shore up was that X position. Look, as Kirby said, it's not the same Georgia football team. There's going to be several positions and several players that are going to have to step up and do something that they've never.
And then I think from a Georgia fan's perspective, unfortunately turned out to be true, is the idea that we would see a little bit of a divergence on timelines on a couple of these injury situations, that a lot of the shoulder guys, we've seen that timeline play out before. They were sort of always, I think, likely to be fine, but there'd been enough chatter about the Smile Mondin, foot injury. There had been enough chatter about Branson Robinson to lead you to believe that they were going to be a little bit more delayed than the other guys were in terms of being, kind of full participants in the process for Georgia. We kind of got that confirmed there yesterday, and I don't think these are insignificant stories here. I think that Mondin's one of the best players on that defense. I think that Robinson himself could have a good year at the running back spot. Now, we saw Jalen Carter a year ago, kind of come in late last season as a fully healthy player, made a big impact once he got here. So both Robinson and Mondin may have a chance to do that. Maybe they do that even sooner than Carter did a year ago. But I don't think those are insignificant injury updates to find out that Branson Robinson and Smile Mondin, 2 guys on both sides of the ball there. I don't think those are insignificant stories to find out they won't be fully ready for Georgia to begin this upcoming season.
Well, and that's where the schedule helps out. The last 2 years with Clemson and Oregon at the top of the schedule, you felt like Georgia might need to come out of the gate playing their best ball. And, of course, Kirby's going to insist on that anyway. But if we're being realistic about it, I said this yesterday on the SEC Network, that Georgia has what amounts to 3 Jamboree games in September, maybe 4 if you count UAB. And, I don't expect South Carolina to pose a serious threat. So the fact that you really don't see, I believe, a losable game until September 30th at Auburn. And the only reason I say that is because it's at Auburn and Jordan-Hare, and it will be the first road game. And we really don't know who the quarterback is yet, as much as we all, we're impressed with Carson back in the spring game. Kirby Smart still has hesitation. He still has questions and answers that he says he can only see in games. There's no substitute for what that quarterback does on third down when the Bullets are live. And they'll simulate that in a couple scrimmages, but that'll be the first road start for whoever the Georgia quarterback is. And, while I don't expect Auburn to be that daunting of an opponent, I don't think they'll win more than 7 or 8 games. I think they could be as dangerous as Missouri was in Columbia, certainly playing at a stadium like Jordan Hare.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I know you know how it goes at SEC Media Days where there's so many things being said in so many different venues. It's sort of hard to keep it all straight. I don't know if you're like me and maybe you haven't had a chance to process all of this. I thought that Kirby was a lot more revealing about what he said about Carson Beck on the set with the SEC Network guys, like the whatever that show's called, SEC Now or whatever else. I thought he was a lot more revealing on there about quarterback than he was in any of the other venues that he spoke at yesterday at SEC Media Days, talking about what you just said about, evaluating, in those August scrimmages, especially that second scrimmage where you do have those repeated third down opportunities where they're defensively sort of throwing everything at you, and that's where you learn more about your quarterback in that particular spot, but also acknowledging on TV yesterday that, of course, Beck is in the lead. He was, willing to acknowledge that. It's kind of funny how much more he kind of gave in that forum than I felt like he necessarily gave in some of the other forums in which he spoke yesterday. Did you kind of get the same sense?
Yeah, and I did follow Kirby around, and I'll have some more stories on some of those comments, Brandon, as far as what he said on different programming and, a little bit more revealing. But I think, for a lot of people, it was, some people were taken aback. I mean, there was a lot of Georgia fans, oh, no, it's Carson Beck. Oh, it's all Carson Beck. There's nobody but Carson Beck. No, actually wrong. Wrong answer. A lot's happened since spring drills, and we don't know exactly all of it. But the head coach knows what's going on. And there was a reason why the head coach told us that only 25% of the hay was in the barn when spring drills concluded. There's a reason why the head coach said they all needed to play in games and he needed to see more. But people kind of saw and took what they wanted, and I get it. I mean, Carson is the most experienced guy coming back. And, Brandon, I'll tell you, I think he has the highest ceiling of all the quarterbacks. But I would have said that about Jacob Eason, too. And yet it was Jake Fromm that Kirby trusted moving forward with the program. So we have to look at the personnel. If Georgia has the receiving core they do now in 2021, I don't know that Stetson Bennett holds the job, but they didn't. And Kirby said it's kind of hard to go four wide when you've only got 6 healthy receivers, and suddenly Stetson Bennett and his ability to run the offense and make plays outside the pocket, handle those RPOs, and the way he improved and performed, and he was the guy. I think this is sort of like that. A little bit. Brock Vandagriff a little bit bigger, maybe a little more athletic. Certainly not as proven or as seasoned as Stetson Bennett was, but the same kind of quarterback. So what does Georgia personnel dictate? Is this a 4 or 5 wide offense? Is this a spread team where you want a gunslinger like Carson Beck with that electric arm, big-time throws? Or do you want a guy like a Brock Vandagriff or a Gunnar Stockton that can also hurt teams with his feet? Maybe not the arm talent, certainly not the experience, but maybe a little bit better running the ball, maybe a little bit I guess I'll leave some of these descriptives out till we see more of it. But this has kind of been the chatter I've been hearing the whole offseason, was that this thing wasn't over by a long shot.
All right, give me a quick note here before you go. Billy Napier, Florida on hand. Nick Saban, Alabama. What is the vibe for day 3 at Media Days like right now?
Well, Saban was fantastic in there, and he talked about how expectations were some setup for disappointment, which I thought was a very interesting tack from Nick Saban. But he's fascinating as always. He's good to listen to, and everyone's here for Nick Saban, and the 7-time national champion. Still holds great interest. Like Sam Pittman, I think everybody loves Sam Pittman. I think he's the most entertaining coach in the league. I know people say Lane Kiffin, maybe on Twitter, but certainly not in person. But Pittman's on deck. Two fascinating personalities. And then in the afternoon, Billy Napier. I mean, how much longer is he going to be around, Brandon? Let's be honest. Florida hasn't had a coach with back-to-back losing seasons since the 1940s. And I think you got to go back to the 70s since the Gators had back-to-back losing seasons, period. But, if Billy Napier has a losing record, Pete Thamel looking sharp right there. Man, there's all sorts of celebrities here. If he has a losing season, I don't know that he's back next year, Brandon. Do you think if Billy Napier has a losing season that he would be here at Media Days next year?
I think it would be tough, but it also, if Scott Strickland fires Billy Napier, that means Scott Strickland's getting fired too. So Strickland, the athletic director, may have some motivation to want to keep him around a little bit longer, because if Napier doesn't work, then Strickland doesn't get to make the next Florida coaching hire. So there could be a little bit of extenuating circumstance propping up Napier at Florida a bit.
Yeah. Well, extenuating or not, I've got them picked to finish in the lower half of the East, and they hardly seem like I don't know. I know you will always embrace that rivalry, but
sure.
Boy, that game certainly pales to me when I compare it to the Tennessee rivalry this year, and maybe even the Auburn rivalry, but largely because those games are on the road. But we'll all have a good time eating frozen yogurt and down in Jacksonville, I'm sure.
All right, Mike. It's good to talk to you. Enjoy Nashville, and we will catch up with you again very soon here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
All right. Thanks, Brandon.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So interesting words from Mike Griffith. Obviously, he was, I'm sure being hyperbolic when he talked about the idea of Georgia playing on a 4-wide type set. If you play 4 wide, you don't have a tight end on the field, and clearly Georgia's going to want to do that. If you play 5 wide, you don't have a running back on the field, and clearly Georgia's going to want to do that. So we know that to a certain extent Georgia's going to be Georgia. In fact, I'm not quite sure anyone's ever in the modern era won a championship without a tight end on the field. But you get the overall point that obviously he was trying to make there. Mike has been very clear. He thinks the quarterback competition is still wide open. I think it's unsettled. I'm not quite so sure it's wide open. I don't think you have the news reports about Brock Vandagriff returning, right? I mean, it was basically announced that Vandagriff was not going to transfer. I don't think you have that if it was still, kind of this wide open competition that anybody could win. Could Vandagriff be effective if he were playing at the quarterback spot for Georgia? I obviously believe that he could. Gunnar Stockton, I believe, could as well. But I do think that Carson Beck proved something to me here this spring. Now, as Mike pointed out correctly, we will see if that continues, because obviously you got to do it over a longer window of time, of course. That's going to be required. But in terms of the growth maturity that I think you'd like to have seen from a guy like Beck, who had his chance in 2021 and then did not get it done there in that moment, to me, and I'm saying all this, someone looking from the outside in, of course, I'm not inside the inner workings of that program each and every day, but for me, looking outside in, this looked like an older, more mature, more seasoned version of Carson Beck in 2023 than maybe the guy we saw in 2021, who had his chance of what, just by his own admission, he said that himself here this offseason, was just not quite ready to step up and step into that role. I am sure we'll talk plenty of quarterback stuff here over the course of the next couple of weeks. For now, though, let's talk about cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And obviously, it's a great time to be taking a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, whether you're going on one of these 3 or 4 night sailings. You're on a 7-night sailing maybe on one of those Oasis-class ships, enjoying all of the great stuff Royal Caribbean has to offer, or you're already thinking about January of 2024 when the debut of Icon of the Seas takes place. And this is going to be something that gets so much talk and chatter, even outside our typical sort of circle here, because anytime a cruise ship like this debuts and all the new ideas and opportunities it introduces into the cruise vacation space, it always just creates a lot of fun and a lot of energy, and that's what Icon of the Sea is going to be all about. But don't forget, those aren't the only new things debuting for Royal Caribbean in 2024. You've got Utopia of the Seas coming next summer, too. A brand new Oasis-class ship. How much fun is that going to be? Once again, really cool specialty restaurant offerings and all the entertainment and the neighborhoods. It's the different things you do on a Oasis-class ship where you're left to believe, I can't believe I'm on a cruise. This is like being in a city. It's like a floating city. It's a water park at sea. It's a beach resort at sea. It's all these things at sea. It's truly, truly amazing. And of course, when you're thinking about 2024 cruise travel, you think about that DawgNation cruise there as well. Also on an Oasis-class ship. How about Allure of the Seas, April 22nd through the 26th, going to Perfect Day Coco Cay, going to Nassau in the Bahamas, leaving on a Port Canaveral for the very first time ever, bigger and better than ever before, on an Oasis-class ship, Allure of the Seas. Make sure you check that out. Great travel agent Jessica Slater can help you at that. Find her online, royaldogs.com. That's royaldogs.com. You can find out more about that and be a part of our DawgNation cruise next April, doing it bigger and better than we ever have before. All right, let's go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Let me give you one more recruiting note here for a moment. It's later in the show because, frankly, I'm not quite so sure this has a lot of relevance necessarily for Georgia, but 5-star wide receiver Mike Matthews is committing today. Don't mind telling you, I think that Matthews is a really good player. And I don't mind telling you that on my wish list of players I would like to have come to Georgia here this year, Matthews was certainly one of those guys for me. Always going to have a little bit of a special place in my heart for the guys who do it in-state because I see them more frequently, and I have certainly been dazzled and very impressed by Matthews, obviously receiver at Parkview. I guess the smart money is Matthews to Tennessee. I think that's what the chatter has been as of late when he gets ready to make that pledge. And we will see if that does play out that way. And if that be the case, then Tennessee is getting itself a good one in terms of Mike Matthews. And if it wasn't Tennessee, it'd be somebody else besides Georgia there as well. It just does not seem like the Georgia Matthews thing was ever destined to be. But you know what? Who's to know how the world could turn in the next few years? Maybe things work out at some point in time. But the point is, tonight or today, when Matthews makes his decision, it seems like it's not going to be Georgia, but he is certainly a very good player. Now, let me move through a couple of other SEC through stories here for a moment. I thought that Hugh Freeze had a pretty good day for Auburn yesterday on a couple of fronts. To me, he sounded very much like an SEC coach in talking about the importance of line of scrimmage. After all, Freeze is kind of like the sexy offense guy, right? I mean, this is a guy who kind of made his bones as an innovative offensive guy and playing with a lot of pace there at Ole Miss, taking some of that with him to Liberty. You'll remember he got more out of Malik Willis than Auburn was ever capable of getting out of Willis. That Freeze kind of made his bones as an innovative, tempo-oriented, offensive-style coach. That's just sort of been what he's been. But yesterday, I felt like some of the stuff you heard from Hugh was about line of scrimmage and how that matters in the SEC. And Hugh Freeze kind of acknowledging that he wants to get Auburn back to respectability and kind of competing once again alongside the the Alabamas and the Georgia, something that they haven't been doing, especially against Georgia, in quite some time. I think it's really, really ugly record here combined the last couple of seasons need to be better. And I know that Freeze looked like an SEC coach yesterday there at Media Day. He's obviously been an SEC coach before, and he kind of had some of that sort of seasoned experience about him as he was there yesterday. Now, listen, given the roster the way that it is right now, winning games is going to be a challenge. But they were pretty effective in the portal. They brought in Peyton Thorne at quarterback. Sounds like they want to play him and Robbie Ashford some. Maybe that could be an interesting 2-quarterback offering there. They're pretty aggressive in the portal when it comes to offensive and defensive line. I don't think their recruiting work was necessarily terrible either. I think in terms of short-term work to get your roster a little closer to respectability, I think that Freeze has kind of already done that. And I do think one of the more interesting games on the Georgia schedule this upcoming season is at Auburn on, I believe it's September 30th there. That, to me, is one of those games that you might circle. Who knows how good Tennessee is by the time that Georgia plays it. It could have lost a handful of times, at least twice, before Georgia plays them. But early in the season, Auburn can still be undefeated. Now, they may have losses coming on the other side of that. They almost certainly will. But that Georgia-Auburn game could have a little bit more buzz to it than you might realize, especially if Auburn can win on the road at A&M the week before that. I will tell you this here really quickly there as well. One of the things I did not like yesterday was SEC rules official being asked questions about the horns down gesture. Do you know what that is? Like, instead of the hook 'em horns thing, you take the two fingers and you sort of point it down. That's supposed to be a way of mocking, Texas. It's a fairly tepid form of mockery if it is. And yet, nonetheless, while Texas has been in the Big 12, this is one of those things that seems to be like a big deal every offseason, what the officials say about whether or not they're going to penalize a player for doing the horns down gesture. And now we've got this going on in the SEC there as well. Now, ultimately, I don't think the Texas and Oklahoma have necessarily been incredibly hot topics at Media Days this week. For the most part, the conversation, the best that I can tell, has been about the teams are currently in the league. There have been some questions about the Longhorns and the Sooners, but for the most part, it's been mostly related to what's going to be on the field here in 2023, which I think is good. But I do not want the SEC to become one of these leagues where is horns down going to be a penalty or is it not? I can't think of a more boring conversation than that. And frankly, it's beneath the dignity of the SEC to have to make a big deal about this. And frankly, I don't know that we need officials who take themselves so seriously, whether they be directors of officials or actual officials themselves. I don't know that we need officials who take themselves so seriously that we need to have some sort of long-standing policy about is horns down going to be a penalty the same way the Gator chant might be a penalty or something along those lines. This is just below the standard what I think the SEC should aspire to, and I hope this is the last time we hear anything about horns down. And if somebody does it, I don't think it should be a penalty. If the Longhorns do the horns up, I'm not sure that should be a penalty either. Can we just play football? And, there are places like Texas that seem really attracted to drama. Down here in the SEC, our drama is mostly related to who wins and loses games, and that's the way that I hope this remains. And I don't want to hear about this kind of stuff at SEC Media Days, although admittedly we did hear some of it yesterday. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, I want to turn my attention back to Georgia here for a moment. Before I do that, though, let me remind you about a terrific promotion we have ongoing at DawgNation right now. I meant to tell you this earlier in the show. I want to make sure I tell it to you right now. Our Celebrating Teachers event is taking place at DawgNation.com right now, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. You got a great chance to get involved here and nominate a teacher who's special in your life or special in your community there. That teacher could be a great winner, but guess what? You also get to be a terrific winner potentially just for making that nomination there as well. So we're going to be announcing our winners the week of August 7th through the 11th, but the nomination period is ongoing right now. And if you nominate one of the teachers that ends up being a winner, you can get a $50 gift card to Kroger just for doing that, and a DawgNation gift bag there as well, which includes a T-shirt and all kinds of cool stuff. That's like a $100 value in total on that prize pack just in itself. That's what you get for being a nominator, which is incredibly cool. The teachers themselves, they get a chance to win 4 incredible gift cards, including a $100 gift card to our friends at Kroger. What the backbone of our communities, we believe that's our schools. It's the teachers that make those schools great, working hard to really make sure kids learn what they need to learn and grow the way they need to grow. Great teachers are an invaluable commodity. We want to celebrate some of those great teachers, courtesy of our friends at Kroger right now. So make sure you go to DawgNation.com. Nominate a great teacher. That teacher could be a big winner as we celebrate them starting the week of August 7th. And you could be a winner there as well, just for making that nomination. All right, with all that said, let's transition back to Georgia SEC Media Days just for a moment. A lot of folks made a little bit of a big deal yesterday that in the main podium, which is sort of like the main, like SEC Media is sort of a weird thing because you get the big podium where you talk, and then you go to a smaller room where you essentially do the same thing all over again. And it's always one of those things where like the players and the coaches are like, why are we doing this again? We just did this in a different room. Now we're doing it in this room. But that's just sort of the way the event has sort of always played out. But a lot of folks sort of made a little bit of a big deal about the fact that yesterday Kirby Smart was only asked one question in sort of the official forum about the offseason concerns that Georgia has dealt with, and some of this stemming from the terrible car crash that cost Chandler LaCroix and Devin Willock their lives back in January, and some subsequent speeding issues that have come up about the Georgia program, since then. That Smart was sort of only asked one question about that yesterday, and for me, that's actually less surprising for me, maybe, than it was to some, and I'll tell you why. I don't talk a lot about numbers and things like that. You don't care, but I'm in a very privileged position as the host of DawgNation Daily because I get a chance to interact with tens upon tens of thousands of you who tune into our show every day. And what I can tell you is that while the stuff going on with Georgia away from the field and some of what's been said about Georgia going away from the field has been a hot topic for some, the truth is that the overall dominant conversation around Georgia here this year, this offseason, really, to me, hasn't been that different than it typically is. Yes, Georgia still mourns a tragedy, and yes, Kirby Smart, as he said many times, takes it very seriously, some of the speeding issues that have been unearthed about his team. But that has not prevented us from being able to talk about regular football stuff, which is, after all, what our job is here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We've talked about position battles and who Georgia's going to play and the outlook for the season. That's been possible to do. There are moments, to give you kind of a comparison here in sports, where that's simply not the case. I was doing sports radio back in Atlanta 20-whatever years ago when, like, the Michael Vick stuff was happening around the Atlanta Falcons, and there were the reports about the dogfighting and things like that. At that point in time around that franchise, it would have been impossible to talk about anything else. You had the PETA protesters and you had the whatever else. I mean, the scene around Flowery Branch where the Falcons organization was housed, it was a circus. It was a madhouse, and it was the kind of thing that sucked the life out of any other possible conversation. Sometimes off-field issues become so significant that you can't talk about anything else. And with Georgia here this offseason, there's been some serious stuff going on, of course, but it's not been the kind of thing that has prevented other conversations from taking place. It's simply not. Our show stands as a testament to that. So the idea that it didn't dominate the media situation yesterday is, in my mind, no way surprising, because while it has been a present factor in the offseason conversation, it has not been the dominant discussion point, I don't believe, for Georgia here this offseason. Your own experience might validate that there as well. But as far as what Kirby Smart did say on some of those speeding issues he was asked about yesterday, once again, giving the kind of, clear, I think, unmistakable message that he's delivered in the past. This is what Kirby Smart did say on that topic yesterday.
I'm disappointed anytime we have traffic incidents. It's very evident when you look at it. We've had traffic citations and incidents throughout the history of being at the University of Georgia. And we actually don't have more now than we've had in the past. So what concerns me most is the safety of our players, all right? And when you drive at high speeds, it's unsafe. And we don't want that to happen. We're going to do all we can to take that out and make sure that's eradicated. But I'm also smart enough, Pat, to understand and know that 18 to 20-year-olds is when this happens. When it happened to me as a student athlete. That's when speeding happens. What we want to do is take that out and make it safe and not have high speeds. If somebody's going to get a speeding ticket, it should not be a super speeder.
The Pat that Kirby references there is a guy named Pat Forty, who's a national columnist, who asked the question to Kirby right there. And the words that Smart used reinforces some of what I've said about this particular topic in the past. The thing is that some people mistakenly assume that a program like Georgia and any program that might find themselves in a similar position is somehow incentivized to let the players do whatever they want to do. But as Smart points out, if you are driving too fast, you're putting yourself in jeopardy. And parents don't want to trust their players with programs who don't care about the safety of the players. They wouldn't want to do that. There is a strong incentive on the part of Georgia to solve this because they obviously want to keep the community safe, but they want to keep the players themselves safe. And oftentimes the person you put in the most danger when you drive way too fast is the person actually driving the car. I think that Smart, kind of correctly points that out. I think it also is important to kind of frame this the way that Kirby does right there, that in a lot of instances, this may not quite be a crime to be punished. It may be more just sort of a problem to be solved. I mean, after all, I've kind of been honest about this before. When I was young, I had, a handful of speeding tickets. And, a couple of those were, numbers that were pretty high. I don't know if we had the idea of super speeder back then, but we had some sort of category because, I got treated pretty harshly on at least one of the speeding tickets that I got. I don't say that to downplay it. I say that to say that, hey, this is one of those things that a lot of people, hopefully, you just sort of grow out of. And the job of the Georgia program is to help the players in the program sort of grow out of that faster. And I think that maybe punishment's a part of that. I mean, clearly there are some things that probably need to be punished. But for the most part, this is about, I think, education and communication and probably a lot of ways some accountability. So I think the good news, if you're a Georgia fan, is it seems like the Georgia program takes that seriously. Obviously, we can't know what's anyone's heart or mind, but we certainly don't have any reason to disbelieve Kirby Smart when he talks about how important he views this topic to be. So it's clearly been discussed. It was discussed some yesterday. It was not the dominant narrative around the Georgia program. I didn't expect it to be. It played out pretty much the way that I thought that it would. And after Kirby Smart said what he said there, said what he said, a week or so ago, you're sort of left to wonder what else there is to be said about all of this. Let me also give you one more quick shout out before we wrap things up on our program today. That is our friends at the Finished Long Drink, and what an exciting new offering the Finished Long Drink has for us right now. You've tried all the other varieties. You've heard me talk about the Long Drink Zero, the Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume, the Long Drink Cranberry, the traditional, which I've always loved, blue can, grapefruit flavor, gin kick, the sort of mixed drink in a can that the Finished Long Drink is famous for being. You've heard about all of that, but have you tried the brand new offering from our friends at the Finished Long Drink, the peach flavor? That's right, all the way from Finland, a flavor for the Finished Long Drink, perfect for those of us here in the Peach State, the peach flavor of the Finished Long Drink. So if you're hanging out at the lake, if you're at a golf course, if you're going fishing, if you're at the pool, if you're just doing anything with a summertime vibe this summertime of year, the Finished Long Drink, the peach flavored version of that, is exactly what you want to be taking with you. So make sure you try it. Go to thelongdrink.com. You can put in your zip code. You can find out where you can pick some up today. The cool thing is by now, it's pretty much matriculated its way everywhere, and by now, most of you have had some sort of experience with it. When we first started talking about this years ago, maybe you said, B, I have no idea what this Finished Long Drink is. Well, guess what? Now you do. Now you love it. And the peach-flavored version of the Finished Long Drink may be your favorite flavor yet. Make sure you check it out today. Fun golden shoe today from our buddy James Lawson. I say our buddy because James was a part of the very first ever DawgNation cruise, so kind of part of the ground floor of something that's become great here at DawgNation. He also shares this, a photo of the terrific DGD Lauren Smith. I believe this must have been from the Them Dogs documentary. James shares this, says, find you someone that looks at you the way that Lauren Smith looks at the Georgia Bulldogs. No doubt about that. Hashtag Go Dogs, hashtag DawgNation, and a little shout out to me there at DawgNation Daily. You love to see it, and you love the way in which so many of the folks who made kind of Georgia football what it is over the course of not just years, but decades. The fact that they have been able to enjoy and experience the success of the last couple of years, that is truly a great thing to see. And Lauren, one of those guys I love, kind of bumping into press box games all across the country every time the Georgia Bulldogs play. You'll see Lauren Smith there. And, of course, it makes it think about the old days of, what do you got, Lauren, from the terrific Larry Munson. Memories that will never fade from our minds, for sure. So good stuff. James Lossman will give you a golden shoe for that. And, of course, our Gator Hater Countdown. Billy Napier is at SEC Media Days today. If anybody worth their salt wants to ask him the best question, it's this: what are you going to do about those Georgia Bulldogs? The only answer: nothing you can do right now. And 101 days, it gets even worse. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can check out R.S. Andrews and all of that. We did very short stint of comments yesterday. We'll try to go a little longer on that today, and we'll let you tell us what you want to have on your mind. So let's pop in here. Let's do it on Facebook first, and we'll kind of roll through everything else after that. All right. On Facebook to begin. Let's see how folks are doing. William Camacho checking out. You always love to see it. Kent Holcomb says, I watched the Them Dogs documentary on the SEC Network again last night. Kirby motivated sloth. Could motivate a sloth or a snail. I'm pumped. Go Dogs. I love to see it. And listen, when you watch stuff like this, or, you know, like, I'm certainly not embedded within the Georgia locker room, of course, but you do get a little bit of sort of vision of some of this kind of stuff when you're at these games and you're kind of down there in that locker room area, especially before the big games. The thing that I'm always like impressed by is it just looks like being a part of a team like this would be about the most fun thing you could ever do. That's always the sense that I get. Like when I go to practice, for the brief window of time I get a chance to view practice, there's an energy that's really addictive to me. And there's an energy around this thing before the games, because what you really see is, okay, well, there's 10 coaches that are famous to us, and there's a million supporters that are kind of helping those coaches, and everybody just feels really a part of it, right? And if you've ever been a part of a team, you understand how much fun that is. And when you get older and you're no longer kind of on a team the same way, you realize how great it once was. That there is, maybe this is kind of a guy thing. Obviously, I only sort of know this from the guy standpoint, but there is just something about being on a team like this that just feels like the most genuine experience you can ever have. And I realize the coaches are always competing for their jobs. There's pressure that probably kind of robs their joy from time to time. For the players, they have a very short window to maximize their future earning potential for the NFL. I'm sure they feel pressure about that. I don't want to glorify it and make it something that it's not, because there's a lot of butterflies in the stomach at all times. But once again, it's that sort of team bond that I do think makes it easier to endure all of that. And when I watch a Them Dogs documentary, or when I spend a little bit of time around the Georgia program in kind of a practice setting or a pregame setting or something like that, you know, for me, it's sort of less about what can I observe that helps me do my job better, and it's more about just the sort of general sense of there's a reason that people like to be around teams so much. There is a real energy here that you want as much of as you can possibly get. And for whatever reason, it's really hard to recreate that away from sports. It just is. And, you know, every business in the world is like, hey, this is our team. We're teammates. There is something about the presence of a ball that just makes that easier to believe. You know, when it's spreadsheets and, you know, expense reports, I don't know that the whole team concept really ever becomes as authentic. But when it's a competition involving a ball, for whatever reason, that just seems to be an easier thing to conjure up. I don't know why, and I'm always struck by that. Scotty Barnes says, I don't want to make light of it, but he talks about, hey, giving the guys some track time on Atlanta Motor Speedway to go drive their cars fast. Yeah, I mean, I guess I do think about that sometimes is that, if you got a fast car, you do want to drive it fast. That just goes without saying. So maybe you take it on a track or something like that, I guess. I mean, the thing that I point out is like for a long time, like when I was younger, I had a nice car. And then I realized, you know what, nice car doesn't make me a better person. So therefore, maybe I don't need a nice car if I'm not really quite so sure I can afford it. Let me make more, for me, prudent financial decisions. If you've got millions and millions of dollars, you can spend your money whenever you want to. There's no problem with that. For me, I decided that, hey, a nice car for me for a long portion of my life didn't make a ton of sense because I'm better suited putting my money towards other things. And so like the last year or so, I've kind of gotten a little bit more, it's not a nice car necessarily, but it's just a little bit more of a late model car, if you get my point, sort of a regular, couple-year-old car. Like regular cars go way faster than cars used to. You don't have to have the Hellcat, whatever else, to go fast. Like a regular car goes fast enough to be a super speeder, right? I mean, just regular cars go fast now. So you can make the big deal and understand why people do about some of the kind of vehicles that young guys want to drive. And if you've got money to drive a nice car, many young people would certainly want to do that. But the regular off the, assembly line vehicle itself, just bone stock cars, they go plenty fast enough now to, get yourself in trouble if you're not careful. By the way, back during the pandemic, like the heart of the 2020 pandemic, when nothing was going on anywhere, Atlanta Motor Speedway did this thing where, like back then, everybody's just trying to have some sort of business, right? It's like we got to generate some sort of revenue somehow, and it was a really scary time. And frankly, there's a lot about that period I don't think has been fully, examined the way it should have been. But nonetheless, really scary time. A lot of businesses, a lot of organization entities were worried about their future, and so you got AMS who's like, hey, not only are we not making any money, we got all this stuff that we bought, souvenirs to sell at the races. We're not going to have a chance to sell it. So not only are we not bringing in revenue, we're actually in the hole for a bunch of stuff we bought and now we can't sell it. So what they had the idea of doing is, and maybe some of y'all did this too, is it's like $25. You could drive 3 laps around the track, and they would give you like a gift pack that included. I've got the video of this. I should show this. They give you a gift pack that included like some of the souvenirs they would have sold in their own hauler, not the specific drivers, but like the AMS branded, stuff from the souvenirs, like a die-cast car and a hat. It's like nice, but for $25, you got to drive 3 laps around the track. I got to tell you something. That was fun. That was fun. They didn't let you go all out, but you have to go. I mean, you got to go about 90 to stay up on the banks. If you don't go at least 80, those banks are high banks, right? If you're going 40 miles an hour, you don't stay on that bank. So you had to go 80 or 90 to stay on the bank. So I drove 3 laps with my wife and kids. We had to give you an idea of the kind of like not nice cars that we've typically driven. Not to say this is not a good family vehicle for us, but I'm just saying not the kind of thing you would typically drive at AMS. We drove a Honda CR-V on Atlanta Motor Speedway track for 3 laps. As much fun as anything. And at that time in 2020, everybody needs something fun to do. So we did that. And the track did a good job with this. They were like playing music over the speakers and stuff like that. So you kind of felt like a little bit of adrenaline around it. And there were some people that had like the Corvettes and the things like that. And I'm sure they were really wanting to cut them loose. They probably didn't feel like they got to, kind of turn it loose as much as they probably wanted to. But it was fun. 3 laps around the track. That was pretty fun. That's a pretty clear departure from our conversation, but nonetheless. Eric DeVorncy says, my wife bought me the Atlanta experience once, but I don't like people telling me how to slow down or quit passing. Wife already does that. Yeah, that's kind of funny. The one thing I've never done is, I used to have the old Richard Petty driving school where you actually drove the NASCAR, the stock car. I've never done that. But that would be fun. But yeah, Eric brings up a pretty good point. You got to go a certain speed, otherwise you can't keep up, but you can't go too fast. Steven Swick says Talladega does that. I'd love to do that at Talladega. That'd be fun. Get a little, that would be fun. Ken Holcomb says, I played sports until I was 48, and I'm 67 now and still miss my teammates. I do have a great dog that is my fishing buddy every day, though. Boy, that's good to see. That is very good to see. That is very good to see. Let us see what else here. Pete Williams checking in to say, go dog sick 'em. Absolutely, Pete. Appreciate that. Let me So Barry Watkins, Philip Jordan Wells talking about the idea of setting the rules and sticking to it. He says, we're going to tolerate excessive speed at the University of Georgia, 2 strikes and you're out. Yeah, so, I sort of get the idea of that, and there seems to be a pocket of people who kind of want something that sort of equates to a zero-tolerance policy. Now, that particular description, I believe, from Barry is not, zero tolerance. It's more like 2 tolerance, whatever. But at the same time, speeding is obviously an issue. And when you have a large number of speeding tickets consecutively, that feels like an even bigger issue. But I'm going to tell you right now, I am not kicking a guy off the team for a speeding ticket. I'm just not doing it. And I would advise Tennessee and Florida and Auburn and whatever else, I would advise them not to do that either. That is, are you familiar with the phrase, when the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem feels like a nail? Like, that feels like trying to hammer a nail that does not exist. I take the speeding stuff seriously. We all mourn what happened with Devin and Chandler, and I mean that sincerely. But I'm telling you right now, I wouldn't want Georgia or any other team in the SEC to kick a guy off the team for 1 speeding ticket. I just wouldn't. Now, if we're talking about extenuating circumstances and things like that, or if this is where you kind of get into issues that I don't even want to talk about. If you told me that legally there was a harsher punishment for excessive speeding, I might be willing to listen to that. If law enforcement punished excessive speeding more severely, I might be willing to listen to that. Because as I said to the other day, it's like I drive on 400. I'm dodging cars all the time now. Like, it's crazy how people drive. I don't know why. In the last couple of years, you have your own theories, I guess, but last couple of years, people just drive like maniacs. And I feel like I experience it all the time. So if you told me the law enforcement was going to come down harder on excessive speeding, I might be in favor of that. But in terms of a football coach kicking a guy off the team for 1 speeding ticket, I am not in favor of that. Not at Georgia, not anywhere else. I'm just not. I am not a fan of zero tolerance policies. I don't think they work at your child's elementary school, and I don't believe they work for your favorite college football team. And that is just the way that I feel. Scotty Barnes brings up a point that's really important to me. He says, if you kick young men off the team for being young men, how do you help them mature? See, I totally agree with that. I don't make any bones about this fact. If I were Kirby Smart's boss, or if I were the commissioner of the SEC, my overarching viewpoint would be I would take football from a player as a last resort. It'd be the last thing that I did. Taking football from a player would be the last thing I would do. And I feel like I've got a fairly consistent track record on this. That's not just because I'm a Georgia fan and I want to use the phrase that Kirby used yesterday. I want Georgia to be a football factory. I don't want other teams kicking off players for nickel and dime offenses. I just don't. And I'm not saying that some of this stuff doesn't add up to be a larger problem when you have, I guess, media always loves sort of pattern of, of behavior. I'm not saying that doesn't matter somewhat, but ultimately, when you talk about the individual players, like I'm not going to mention a guy by name, but pick a guy that's gotten a speeding ticket. There are some people who would say, well, so-and-so got a ticket and so-and-so got a ticket and so-and-so got a ticket. So therefore, we're going to kick so-and-so off the team because clearly the message hasn't been received. He got a speeding ticket after all these guys did. He doesn't understand how important this is. We're going to kick him off the team. I'll tell you something. If I was that player's parent, I might lawyer up if that be the case. And that is just the way that goes. Let me pop over to YouTube here for a moment. Let's see how they're doing. Let us see. Foster Moss calls me Brandon Earnhardt. If only I could be the intimidator. If only I could be. Bulldog Trucker checking in. First live show in a long time. Great to be a dog. Bulldog, we're glad to have you out there, and thanks for getting that stuff delivered across our country each and every day. We're glad you're here. Frank Patterson brings up a good point. Kirby Smart said yesterday that Brock Bowers is the quietest player he ever coached. He said there ain't no way he's quieter than Nick Chubb is. That's a really good point. If you had the competition to see who's the quietest, like Nick Chubb would be that guy. Like Chubb to me is almost kind of funny because the whole idea of speak softly and carry a big stick, like there is nobody who embodies that more so than Nick Chubb. Like Nick Chubb would rather say 0 words if possible. And yet when it's time to compete, he's just throwing people all over the place, like literally untackleable. He just plays with such a fury. But like the personality, at least in terms of what we get to see, publicly, is like, I mean, he literally is Clark Kent Superman. Like he'll talk and he'll say as few words as possible in as soft a voice as possible. And then when he plays, he's just, whatever. Even like up in Cleveland, you see some of these videos kind of pop up where it's like, he's just mild-mannered off the field, but between the white lines, he's just killing people. Happy 55th birthday to Curtis Jackson. That's awesome to see. Paul Moon says Chubb does not need to use his words. There's no doubt about it. It's also one of those things where, like, and I will never be one of these kind of people. It's like if you don't say very much, when you do say something, it carries a lot of weight. Like I'm the opposite of that. Like in every meeting I'm in, I'm always talking. But if you're Chubb and you don't say very much, when you do decide to speak up and say something, boy, that really matters. He's really good. Jay Shipes always takes the conversation to a place I don't want to go to. Jay Shipes is the Lou Gehrig of taking the conversation to a place that it shouldn't be. 2,130 days in a row. Jay has found a way to do that. Jonathan Aaron says, if we do win a third national title in a row, like I think we will, he says, do you think we get the quote unquote Bama bump? Everyone always wants to give Bama their flowers, even if they don't deserve them. There is no doubt this is true. And it's not a pleasant thing about, but it's true. If Georgia does win this year and keeps on winning, there will come a time in which Georgia is hyped up in a way that it does not deserve. Now, that may be 15 years from now, but eventually that will happen, right? It's like, if you earn enough respect over the course of the long haul, that respect has a tendency to linger a little bit after you no longer deserve it. Duke basketball may be an example of this. Kentucky basketball is obviously an example of that. I'm sure there are professional sports examples there as well of, hey, watch out for so-and-so, like the Lakers, LeBron James. Expiration date seems to have been reached on some of that, and yet the hype is still there. If Georgia wins enough the way we believe they will, then there will be a time in the future where we're going to be sitting here doing the show, God willing, somewhere, and Georgia's going to be like the preseason number 1 team, and some of us are going to be like, are you sure? Really? Are we sure? Are we sure about that? Like Georgia hasn't quite gotten there yet. We feel like Georgia, if anything, is still underappreciated. But there will come a time if they win as much as, like, say, Nick Saban and Alabama have, or maybe even more so than that, where they will no longer be what they once were, and the same people who are slow to realize will be then slow to realize on the other end as well. That's just kind of the way it works, and it will probably be no different for Georgia. BA's Ty Stone Cold Style talking about a Bandit Edition Trans Am. Y'all ever see some of those? I see a couple of those around Atlanta every now and then. Like, that's one of the hottest cars you'll ever see in your life. I mean, and I'm a little bit too young to have even, like, cared about smoking the Bandit when it was, like, a thing. I've seen the movie, of course, but it's not like I grew up with Burt Reynolds and smoking the Bandit, but I just know the movie. Those, like, because what some people do is they'll take a Camaro and they'll, like, basically, like, retrofit a Camaro to look like a Trans Am, and they'll kind of make it that way. But then other people just have, like, the restored version of the original Trans Am. That's a sharp-looking car, man. It really is a sharp car. Let's see what else. Bulldog Trucker says Bama fans are truly hating life these days. They can't get Georgia off their minds. Bama's about to be past that point where they get too much recognition. Yeah, I mean, the conversation around Alabama is going to change real quick if things don't improve on the field this year from where they were. And listen, as I've said the entire offseason, maybe things do change. Maybe Alabama is better. A lot of this stuff fluctuates from year to year. Teams kind of have, various levels of performance. Alabama could get better here this year, but if they don't, I think you're left to conclude something. Let's see what else. Daddy's channel also pointing out that whatever disappointment might exist in Georgia's future, that's a long time from now. And Daddy, I believe, is right about that. That's kind of what this year's about. I was looking at some of this yesterday, and I couldn't quite get the history to make the point that I wanted to make, so I just sort of let it go. But because there were actually more coaches with 3 championships than I probably realized. But my theory on this is sort of, if Georgia gets the 3rd this year, they may get 8. You know what I'm saying? It's like, but if they don't get this one this year, it's a possibility anyway that this doesn't quite turn out to what some people think it might be. And I know that seems overly fatalistic, and probably is, because Kirby's still a very young guy. But there is something for Georgia here this year where it's just sort of like that lever of achievement can be flicked here, and you can open up this entirely new threshold. I think if Georgia wins this one this year, then the total number of national championships that you think Kirby could win at Georgia, it's got to go way up. It's got to go way up. Because, as I've said before, the 12-team playoff, that makes it easier for the best teams. And right now, Georgia is the best team. The 12-team playoff, it's sort of like in golf, if you care about golf. A lot of people tell you that the quality of course is determined by the quality of the winner. The better the challenge, the more distinguished the winner is. You look at the courses that have produced the Tiger Woods championships over the years and the Jack Nicklaus championships before that. Those are legitimate courses. The sort of Mickey Mouse course where Ben Curtis or Sean McKeel wins, you sort of left to conclude, I'm not really quite so sure this is the best test. Well, that's what college football is about to be in 2024. And it's one of the reasons why I'm in favor of playoff expansion. It's improving the quality of the test. You are asking a better question of the would-be national championship contenders. How well can you perform over a sustained period of time? Anyone can win 2 games. Like, as a thought experiment, take the number 4 team in the country out of the college football playoff and replace that with the number 12 team in the country. It'd be possible in some years for that number 12 team in the country to potentially win 2 games because upsets can happen. Football is one of those deals. But when you add another layer to that, all of a sudden now you're not one of the 4 best, you're one of the 12 best, and you could have to win, a handful of times basically to get to that spot, potentially 3 games to get to that spot. All of a sudden now you're just talking about an overall better test for, who the eventual national champion might be. So better to be the best team facing that test. And if Georgia concludes 2023 still the best team, then they could be in a position to, I know it sounds, grandiose to say this, they could honestly be in a position to dominate the 12-team playoff. The point that I made earlier in the summer, once again, this is so grandiose it'd be easy to disregard it as unserious, which I totally get. But Kirby, as young as he is, with what's potentially at stake for Georgia here this year, and what could happen after that, he may be less the next Nick Saban, and maybe more so college football's version of what John Wooden became for UCLA. That's at least a possibility. Spencer Clark, looking forward to going some fishing. Enjoy that, Spencer. That's awesome to see. Let's see what else. B.A.'s tie, Stone Cold style, says Kirby should come out at every game with the glass-breaking Stone Cold song and then the red-covered stadium saying, give me a hell yeah. I wouldn't mind that. I wouldn't mind that at all. Did y'all see the thing that got put out the other day of what coaches would look like with long hair? Speaking of pro wrestling and stuff. I thought the picture of Kirby with the long hair actually looked pretty good. I don't think he would ever do it. I didn't think Kirby with long hair looked too bad. Most of the other coaches, I didn't think their long hair did them any favors. Kirby with long hair didn't look too bad to me. Daddy's Channel says if the Dogs do go for 3-23, Kirby's going to set his own bar for sure about that. Jerry Dog Fan says Division II football has a playoff, right? It does. FCS has had, the expanded playoff for a long time, and North Dakota State's won like 9 of the last 12 or something like that. So these expanded playoffs have a tendency to be dominated by a small number of teams. Spencer Clark says he's going to save me a mess of them. I appreciate that. Yeah, we went fishing a little bit last Saturday. Didn't catch anything. But we did go out there for a little bit, which is always nice. My son is a lot more, like I'm not a natural outdoorsman. It's not really what I grew up being interested in. It's amazing how kids are they have their own personality, right? So, I did not really grow up as an outdoorsman. But my son, from the time he was like a little boy, was super interested in that kind of stuff. And he's kind of, become a pretty little fisherman here. Just, certainly, like I've learned about fishing because he likes it. And it's just amazing that, obviously a lot of what he is sort of shaped by my personality, my wife's personality. But these kids, they got their own personalities and they're born with them. He came out of the womb liking fishing and stuff like that, when that's not really what I grew up with. But I tell you, I never knew how fun it could be. Like, I'd rather play golf than go fishing, but I never knew how fun fishing could be until you go fishing with your son, and you're out there, and some days you catch a lot of stuff, and some days you don't catch very much, but still fun, for sure. DMar42 says, I've been stuck at work. What's the most important takeaways for UGA from media days? Y'all help out here a little bit. I guess I'll give you a couple of tangible points. We addressed some of these yesterday. The smoke buoy departure, that's a factual big deal. Lingering injuries for Smile Mondon and Branson Robinson, I'd say that's a pretty big deal. The quarterback stuff was pretty much as I think you'd expect it to be. Kirby keeping the cards close to the vest, as he sort of typically does. And then I guess other than that, the reaction that some people seem to be having is pleasantly surprised on the eyes of some. I said this wasn't a huge surprise for me, but pleasantly surprised in the eyes of some how well received Georgia seemed to be yesterday by the media folks on hand. Christy says, don't go fishing with Saban. I'm like everybody else. Like, first of all, like Lake Burton is amazing. Like Lake Burton that really is kind of a cool place. Now, it's a little too fancy for me. I don't get to go there very much, but when I do kind of take the boat over there and see Saban's house. It's really weird. Like these coaches are so famous, and yet a lot of them just have like the lake houses, just like right there in the middle of the lake, and everybody on the lake knows where the house is. Of course, I would always tell you, if you ever don't go harassing these people. Leave them alone. Let them have their peace. But I have taken the boat over there to see the Saban house on Lake Burton before. I have done that. DMar42 says, the Mondon injury is huge. Hope he can be full speed by Auburn. Yeah, that'd be good. I think that'd be a good – I mean, to be greedy, you'd love to have him play the week prior to that so he's more ready for the Auburn game. But it sounds like that's going to be one that sort of lingers for us here a little bit. Foster Moss wondering how the Auburn fishing team's doing these days. Yeah, obviously that was a big joke for us a few years ago, the cheating that they were accused of doing. Very, very funny stuff. All right. It's a good point. Jerry Dog fans said that Kirby looked like the young version of Michael Scott. The in The Office where like it shows the early version of Michael Scott with the hair down. That is kind of true. I hesitate to say this because people don't like any kind of reference to politics. I thought that Sam Pittman with the long hair looked just like Steve Bannon. I thought he looked just like Steve Bannon with the long hair. CF mentioning Ben Curtis. Yeah, he did win the British Open. What I mean is that a lot of times you judge the quality of the course, the quality of the quality of the setup by the winner it produces. And with all due respect to the Open Championship, which by the way begins today, and Ben Curtis, that is a little bit of a random outcome for what you would hope to have for a major championship. John Hendricks says it could be a great opportunity for Xavier and Sori. I think you're right about that. I think that Sori could benefit. I mean, you hate to say somebody benefits from an injury, but somebody's got to play. Sori could be that guy. I'm telling you right now, some of those young guys, you're going to have a hard time keeping them off the field. Do I want to look C.J. Allen in the eye and tell him he can't play? I don't want to do that. So he may be a tough guy to kind of keep out of a situation like that too. Robert Barnes says fishing with my sons is some of our best memories. For sure that's the case. By the way, it's good to see Robert. I feel like we hadn't seen Robert in a little while. But good to see you here today, Robert. And you better believe, great memories. Especially there's this little spot we go on, we're on vacation. And for whatever reason, we always have great success there. Always have great success. And it's just really fun. It's just really fun. There is something very satisfying about that little tug on the line. You get that little click, that little tug on the line. It just feels good. I don't know. It just feels good for sure. Let's see what else. Let me go over to DawgNation.com for a minute. After that, I've got to wrap up. It's getting late. Where'd this go? Here we are. Randy Hall says, the coach of the SEC meeting, who do you predict will not be back next year? I would say most likely to get fired is probably Eli Drinkwitz, or just most likely to leave, for whatever reason. I would say that could be Drinkwitz. Maybe he has a better year and saves his job. It's a possibility, but I'd say he's the most likely. As I mentioned with Mike, Billy Napier needs more success, but there's an extenuating circumstance there in the fact that if Napier flames out, then the spotlight's on Scott Strickland at that point in time. And, these administrative types are self-preservationists. And so Strickland, I'm sure, is probably pretty aware of that. And then if I go any further on this topic, it makes me mention coaches' names that I don't want to mention. So let me just hold off on that. But I'd say that it doesn't really seem like right now we're all that close to a lot of coaches getting fired, right? I mean, Heupel's in good shape at Tennessee. Beamer's in good shape at South Carolina. Clark Lee's in good shape at Vanderbilt. They won 5 games a year ago. He's in a pretty good spot here right now. Mark Stoops is probably worth watching from the standpoint of, had the Michigan job come open, there were some people who thought that Stoops could have been a candidate for that. It's not a very well-kept secret. There's a pretty big feud right now that has been ongoing with, say, Stoops and Calipari, the basketball coach. Mitch Barnhart, the AD, is not very popular right now. Mark Stoops would have job offers if he wanted to go somewhere else. It could get to a point where maybe Stoops does want to go somewhere else. That's probably worth watching, I guess, a bit. Lane Kiffin, I know he wasn't very popular with Ole Miss fans a year ago. I think that Ole Miss could be in for a tough season. Now, some of y'all say I'm too hard on Kiffin. I'm not fair to him. But this is my opinion nonetheless. They've got the entirety of the SEC West one more time, cross-division game against Georgia, non-conference game against Tulane. That's a very tough schedule. It's a very tough schedule for Ole Miss. So does that create a little bit of instability for Lane Kiffin? I'm not talking about getting fired necessarily, because I think that Ole Miss maybe thinks they can't do better than him right now. But does Kiffin not like the heat? Does he look to move somewhere else if he can? That's at least worth considering. And the name I didn't want to mention a moment ago, but I'll at least say this right now. I love Sam Pittman. I openly root for Sam Pittman. Sam Pittman needs to win some games at Arkansas. He does. Randy Hall asked if my son is a carnival barker while fishing. He is actually a little bit. The old joke about the one that kind of got away. He sort of naturally tells the sort of fish tales like that. And like last week, he did have what looked to be a pretty good fish on the hook, and it just sort of wriggled away because sometimes they do. And over the course of the day, that fish got bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's like the old joke, but in his case, he doesn't even know that's a joke. It's just sort of true. DT says, didn't Drinkwitz just get the $2 million raise and the 3-year extension? He was extended, but we're also talking about a situation where the SEC is about to be in a very competitive situation. In the case of Missouri, that could be extra true because they may be in a situation where they're playing, Oklahoma every year, for instance, things like that. So, I don't know that the buyout's going to prohibit them doing that, but you could be right. Mitt Layton says, didn't you just love Brock being Brock yesterday when he was asked if he was the best tight end in the country? What a great example of a humble athlete that's a complete team player. I totally agree with that. I mean, I think that Brock Bowers is sort of everything you want. You have the stuff at the NIL and him foregoing some opportunities to give his teammates a chance to enjoy that. Not that Brock shouldn't be able to go out and get whatever money he can get. I certainly don't want to shame him from taking NIL money. But Brock just comes across like a really good dude. And, not wanting to proclaim himself the best talent in the country. Frankly, that's why guys like me have an important job. If Brock Bowers isn't going to toot his own horn for the success that he obviously has had and probably will have this year too, then all the more reason we need to do that for him. And we truly think he's a great player. But yes, first of all, it's great to hear from you in the comment section today. And I think you're 100% right about that. Senior Dog 54 says, I thought that Kirby Smart did a great job yesterday, witnessing a man at the very top of his game. Totally agree with that. And I think you're right. Georgia is blessed to have him here right now. DT says that Drinkwitz's raise took him from $4 million to $6 million. I'm not saying Missouri's made of money, but if they wanted to move off of a guy like that, I don't think that's a prohibitive financial amount. I don't think. But it would probably have to be pretty bad for them to want to do that. I would certainly acknowledge that. ATL Dog 17, I also agree with you. I thought that Van Prawn, very impressive yesterday, as we knew he would be. All right, final round of comments, and we'll wrap it for today. Johnny Prescott says KJ Jefferson's been a big help to the pit boss. Next year could be tough if they can't replace him at quarterback. I think that's true. I also think losing Kendall Briles as the offensive coordinator is going to be a tricky thing here this year. Dan Enos is a coach that I have liked. That's the new OC. I don't know that his coaching star is quite as bright and shiny as it once was, but, Pittman did a really good job of holding on to assistants for a little while. Now, eventually, I think that Barry Odom actually became a little bit of a cement block to the program. But Briles, I think, is a really sharp offensive coordinator, and, Kendall's now left. So replacing him is a pretty big deal, but Jefferson has been a good quarterback. And listen, Arkansas has been so close, right? Like the game against A&M a year ago. There are other examples where it's like they're so close to really getting those wins. Had 9 wins, in 2021, so they've had, a good season. But keeping that momentum going is never an easy thing to do, and so that's some of what Pittman's going to have to deal with here this year. Let's see what else. Barry Watkins says to tell my son that even The Rock loses fish off the hook. I like that, Barry. That's good advice. I like that, Barry. Really good stuff. Spencer Clark says Baylor seems to be fading. We'll see about that. I do think when you talk about, really good coaching staff, obviously Baylor's got that in place, the former LSU DC. I think that's the case. Paul Moon, but you're right. I mean, the Big 12 this year I think is actually going to be a pretty fun league. I do. I think the new entries to that league make for a pretty competitive environment. Paul Moon mentioning Arian Smith. Boy, that's a fun one to think about this year. It really is. Let's see what else. Final comments. Alan Hampton said he wouldn't be totally surprised if Brock Bowers stayed another year. I think the problem with that is I think he has a chance to be a top 5 pick, maybe, certainly a first-round pick. I mean, at that point in time, my advice to him would be not to stay. When you have that kind of draft position, I'd love to see Bowers be here as a senior, but boy, that's the kind of draft success that'd be really, really hard to turn down. DMart42 says, I'm way too high of expectations for Arian Smith. I'm hyped for him. Yeah, I'm pretty hyped there as well. I really am. Pretty hyped as well. All right. Last comments. Let's see what else. South GA Dog asking about the scholarship situation when it comes to Smoke Bowie. So I think what Mike meant about that is, you're talking about transfer portal being over with, and you're talking about your opportunity to add another player has kind of gone away. Could you, I guess, give the scholarship to somebody else? I guess you probably could. Don't know that Georgia will do that, but I guess you probably could, I guess. All right, so let's get ready to go for today. Appreciate all of that. Thanks for being with us. R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Showing up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust all of them on all of that. Y'all have a great day. Get that air. It's going to be really, really hot, by the way, the next few days, and every day for the foreseeable future, I guess, as well. So get that AC tuned back up to factory fresh specs. They'll do it for you, and it only costs you $99. Find them online, rsandrews.com. So that is that, and then we'll see you back here tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. 9:45 for our first and 15, 10 a.m. everywhere after that. We will talk to you then.